The frozen morning air over the Donbas carried a deadly silence, the kind that usually comes before something unimaginable, a silence filled not with peace, but with dread. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the thunder of artillery was waiting to awaken. Yet, in the villages and ruined industrial towns of eastern Ukraine, whispers were already spreading. Azov has moved. Those 5 words were enough to rattle both soldiers and civilians. The Azov Brigade, feared, legendary, controversial, yet undeniably effective, had launched something new, something bold. And this time, it wasn't just about defending trenches or repelling a wave of armored vehicles. This time, it was about trapping Russian columns, locking them into corridors so narrow, so suffocating, that even steel machines would feel claustrophobic. Across the ruined battlefields, the word spread. A corridor had been sealed. Russian columns, once confident in their heavy armor and relentless momentum, suddenly found themselves in a cage of fire and steel. But how did Azov do it? How did a force that was once mocked by Moscow as nothing but militia manage to execute a maneuver that has stunned even NATO commanders? To answer that, we must go back to the strategy table, back to the blood-stained maps, and back to the roots of Azov's survival instinct. The tactical shift. For months, Russia's war machine had relied on one thing: overwhelming force, long armored columns, stretching kilometers, snaking through fields and towns, pushing toward Ukrainian lines. It was the classic Russian tactic: numbers over precision, mass over maneuver. But Ukraine learned quickly. Every village turned into a fortress, every open road into a potential graveyard, and every Russian column became a target, not just for missiles from the sky, but for soldiers who understood the terrain like the lines on their own palms. Azov saw the pattern. They studied it, and then they set the trap. In the dead of night, Ukrainian engineers dug in. Mines were laid not randomly, but with mathematical precision. Anti-tank trenches carved into the earth, ruined houses reinforced into kill zones, and then the final stroke: narrow escape routes deliberately left open. Escape routes that weren't really escapes at all. Corridors that looked safe, but led only to death. The moment of contact. It was dawn when the Russian column moved in dozens of armored vehicles, supply trucks, and infantry fighting vehicles. The ground shook as steel tracks crushed the frozen soil. Their commanders believed they were advancing into a weakly held zone. What they didn't know was that every movement had been calculated, every step predicted. And then it began. From the left flank, anti-tank missiles screamed, javelins, and LAWs, Stugnapies, each missile hitting its mark. The lead tank burst into flames, blocking the road ahead. Soldiers scrambled, shouting, radios crackling in panic. The column halted, jammed together in the narrow corridor.
That's when Azov's firestorm descended. Mortars rained from the sky. Drones circled above like vultures, dropping bombs with surgical precision. And hidden in the tree lines, Ukrainian snipers waited, picking off officers one by one. Within minutes, what was once an unstoppable Russian advance had turned into a slaughterhouse. That's when Azov's firestorm descended. Mortars rained from the sky. Drones circled above like vultures, dropping bombs with surgical precision. And hidden in the tree lines, Ukrainian snipers waited, picking off officers one by one. Within minutes, what was once an unstoppable Russian advance had turned into a slaughterhouse. The trap tightens. The Russians tried to reverse. They tried to escape. But the rear vehicles had already been destroyed. Smoke and fire sealed the exits. The corridor had become a coffin. Every attempt to flank was met with ambushes. Every attempt to regroup was broken by artillery. Lock the corridor, a Ukrainian commander shouted into his radio. And it was locked. For the Russians inside, there was no way forward, no way back. Just the sound of metal tearing, of fuel tanks exploding, of men screaming. It was more than a battle. It was a statement. The Azov Brigade had sent a message, not just to Russia, but to the world: we can trap you. We can choke your war machine. We can cage your columns and break your spirit. Global shockwaves. The footage spread within hours. Drone videos of burning Russian armor, of soldiers abandoning vehicles and running across frozen fields. Analysts in Washington, London, and Berlin froze as they watched. This was no small skirmish. This was a tactical masterstroke. Military experts compared it to classic World War II encirclements. Some even called it a modern Stalingrad in miniature. Except this time, it was Ukraine executing the encirclement. In Russia, they were left humiliated. Kremlin propaganda struggled. How do you spin dozens of destroyed vehicles and hundreds of casualties? How do you explain to Russian mothers why their sons were trapped like rats in corridors they were promised would be easy victories? The human side. For the Ukrainian fighters, it wasn't just strategy. It was survival. Many of them had lost homes, families, entire lives since 2014. They carried with them not just rifles, but memories of Mariupol, of Bucha, of Kharkiv. Memories of Russian shells flattening their towns. Every destroyed tank wasn't just metal, it was revenge. Every trapped column wasn't just victory, it was justice. A young Azov soldier was recorded saying, "Greater than, we don't have as many tanks as them. We don't have as many planes. But we have one thing Russia doesn't have, we know what we're fighting for." And in that moment, the world understood. Russia on the defensive. As news of the trap spread, panic began to ripple through Russian ranks in other sectors. Convoys slowed down. Commanders hesitated to move columns through open ground. The once relentless advance began to stutter. If one corridor could be locked, how many more were waiting? Russian soldiers began whispering, just as civilians had whispered hours before. Azov has moved. And that whisper carried more fear than any artillery barrage ever could.